Hi, Bill Vales here. Just a little to the north of our town of Littleton, Mass, is the state of New Hampshire, known as the Granite State. New Hampshire has a rich history of mining that has made significant contributions to the cultural, economic, local, regional, and national history. At one time, not that long ago, New Hampshire was the site of some of the world's largest mineral deposits of feldspar, mica, and beryl that could be found anywhere in the world. In this collection of 3 Littleton Rocks on the road shows, we traveled to the site of the Golding-Keene Feldspar Mill in Alstead, New Hampshire. At this site, some of the world's largest deposits of feldspar were crushed or reduced in preparation for transport to other facilities for further processing. Surrounding this site are literally hundreds of mines that contributed numerous minerals to the economies of the region and the economy of our nation. We are fortunate in these shows to have interviews with some of the men that worked in the mining industry in New Hampshire, and in particular at the Golding-Keene Mill and some of the surrounding mines. These men will tell you their stories of working in the mines, operating the equipment, and their participation in the many phases of the mining process that brought these minerals to the later stages of product. Let's take a look at a few of the specimens of the rocks and minerals we will be talking about in these shows. We will discuss how some of the world's largest mica deposits were used in colonial times as glass and lanterns. Mica became a critical and strategic resource for World War II, which contributed to the Allied victory. And here we see some examples of mica. Beryl is the primary source of the element beryllium. Beryl was also another very strategic resource used in the defense industry. Beryl became a key component in the development of the atomic bomb during the Manhattan Project. Beryl is used today for numerous applications, including electronics, communication, medical, and military applications, to name just a few. This example of beryl shows an example that's really leaning towards the full hexagon, 6-sided crystal shape of beryl. Feldspar is the most abundant mineral in the Earth's crust. Feldspar accounts for about 60% of all terrestrial rocks. Feldspar is an important ingredient in the manufacture of glass and porcelain products. There are numerous other uses for feldspar, including fiberglass insulation, drywall compound, abrasive cleaners, paint, the production of steel, and numerous other products and applications. There are numerous types of feldspar based on their chemical composition. Chemically, the feldspars are silicates of aluminum containing sodium, potassium, iron, calcium, or barium, or combination of these elements. Let's take a look at a few of the feldspar specimens. This specimen here is known as labradorite, and it's no surprise that it's found in Labrador, which is where this sample came from, but it's also found in other places. New Hampshire is one. And if you look at this, you can see there's a beautiful blue sheen to this, blue-green sheen. Another example of feldspar is amazonite. And a lot of this is found in the Amazon region, but again, it's also found in New Hampshire. It's out west and many other places. And this has a beautiful green, green shade to it. That's amazonite. This feldspar here is known as microcline. And this microcline example was found in Moat Mountain, which is in Albany, New Hampshire. That's the neighboring town of Conway. And you can see here, this is a well-formed microcline feldspar crystal, and also in this matrix is a crystal of smoky quartz. And Moat Mountain, by the way, is known for its smoky quartz. That's called microcline feldspar. This beautiful piece of red feldspar came from Blueberry Mountain in Woburn, Massachusetts. And I have found red feldspar similar to this in places in Littleton. And this is a fairly, not so much a common, but it's fairly widespread throughout New England and other areas. This is a microcline crystal of feldspar, and the interesting thing about this crystal, and the crystal formation in this is really exquisite, in that this exhibits an attribute known as twinning. And the twinning is that the crystals grow in different directions and they interlock with one another. And this is, feldspar exhibits perhaps 7 or 8 different types of twinning. And that's always special, finding something like that. The geologic setting of New Hampshire explains the abundance of mineral resources. The minerals feldspar, mica, and beryl, and other accessory minerals such as tourmaline, and I have an example of tourmaline here, is a well-formed tourmaline crystal. See, 6-sided, again, this is in the hexagonal system, very well formed. And this was from Groton, New Hampshire. Groton, New Hampshire. And tourmaline and other minerals are common to the pegmatite deposits of New Hampshire. And the pegmatites, this is an example of a pegmatite here. And what a pegmatite is a rock deposit that consists of numerous minerals. And the minerals have been formed because they cool very slowly, very, very slowly, and the minerals get a chance to grow into their crystal structure. And you can see in this pegmatite, we have some mica, Muscovite mica. We also have some tourmaline here. We have a lot of white feldspar, which you can see here, the various white. And we have quartz. And just to show you one other example of a pegmatite, on this pegmatite here, which also has feldspar, Muscovite mica, we see up here this shade here, this is beryl growing in the pegmatite. So sit back, relax, and get ready for some geology talk. Some interesting history and colorful interviews with some of the men that mine the nearby hills of New Hampshire. I hope you enjoy these shows, and we'll see you next time. Hi, Bill Vales here, and today I'm up in Alstead, New Hampshire with Jim Pecora. Jim, thanks very much for being up here and showing us the sights.
Thank you, Bill.
Jim, can you tell us a little bit about this area that we're at?
Sure. Can I give you a little background?
Absolutely.
I did bring along a map of New Hampshire. This was the last map put out by the Geological Survey in 1952, and it's a mine map. And basically, we're in the southwest corner of New Hampshire, which we'll get a close-up of that for you. Mm-hmm. And in this area, it's called the Keene New Hampshire Pegmatite District. So we're just north of Keene. The towns where most of the mines are Gilsum, Alstead, Ackworth, and the surrounding communities. So what I do have here at the bottom of these blow-ups, which has the mine names, is we're right now in the heart of this pegmatite district. This is during the World War II pegmatite investigations in 1942 to 45. This is where they focused all of their energy on for the mica mines. Came back to get very large mica. And so, go ahead.
Okay. So Jim, let me ask a couple questions here for our audience. Can you explain what a pegmatite is?
It's an igneous rock. It's igneous metamorphic sedimentary rock. So igneous is molten magma that comes up from deep within the earth, and as it solidifies, it's cooling underground. So if it came out of the ground, it's lava and a volcano. So this is magma that comes towards the surface, and in this case, we were 4 or 5 miles beneath the surface before all the glaciers and many, eons of glaciation that's taken place in New England that has carved off the top and exposed this pegmatite layer, and so it's a rock that cools slowly and therefore makes large crystals.
Okay, so slow cooling means large crystals.
Correct, yeah.
And fast cooling would mean smaller crystals.
Correct, like a schist, if anybody's seen a mica schist, or small crystal in size that is cooling faster.
Okay, so pegmatites are, they're prized by collectors for sure, but they also had a lot of commercial
use, yeah.
significance and use, and I'm sure you're going to go into a
Sure,
bunch
well,
of
the oldest commercial use is mica. The mica mining in New Hampshire goes back to the Ruggles Mine, originally around 1803, if the dates are correct. 1810, the second oldest mica mine in the country, is directly across the street from where we are here in Alstead. It's known as the Big Mine now, or the Gilson Mine. But anyway, so mica was the indispensable material. It was used for glass windows in early homes where glass wasn't that prevalent, because you can see through it when you flake it thin.
Yeah. Well, no, when you say early homes, how early are we talking?
Oh, this goes back to the 1600s, 1700s.
Okay.
They, if you could find mica, it was a prized commodity.
Okay.
We, as children here, matter of fact, most of the people in our area, this area of southwestern New Hampshire, don't realize how prized the mica was here. The crystals here are enormous. Globally, 80% of all mica is less than a 3 by 3 inch square. You get to an 8 by 10 sheet of mica, it's less than 1/10 of 1%. We have mica crystals in our family that are 18 to 22 inches in diameter, 6 inches thick.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
amazing stuff. So super huge mica, so they could do more with it.
Okay.
You could make a larger window out of it, and horse and carriages used it, ships used it. The ships came from England. The Ruggles Mine, that's where they started selling the mica, was in the port of Boston, because in a storm, the glass would break in their lanterns. They wanted mica because it could withstand the breaking. It has some flexibility. Can I show you a piece?
Yes, please.
So this is, again, a fairly good sized piece, but not the size that we're talking about, and it's fairly transparent, but it also has flex.
Yes.
But it's also strong.
Yes.
So the light from oil lamps and this light could come through it. It's how stagecoaches could operate at night, with the amount of light that they got out front.
Now, mica has this characteristic that it separates easy across this plane.
Correct.
Well, I'm not sure this is a good description.
But yeah, it comes off in flat sheets.
Yeah, so it has that characteristic of foliation, but yet any plane perpendicular to that, it's very
sturdy.
flexible.
Yeah.
It's sturdy. Yeah.
And it was an interesting fact. I mean, you can't see it for the camera right now, but crystals of mica can grow within mica. So this particular one I have has a very small black crystal growing and a few green. Mica comes in green, red, black is called biotite. But this clear mica like this is muscovite. And so that was the most sought after material. And we use a ton of this today. 2008, the United States used 280 metric tons. Number one use is paints. All different kinds of paints have mica in it as a lubricant to spread it on the wall. But every metallic paint, any car that has metallic paint, that's mica that you're seeing. The second use is drywall compound. When you pick up one of those tubs of drywall, it's up to 40 or 50% mica, and mica is very heavy. But it's a lubricating, it's in there for its lubricating properties. Yeah. We use it in cosmetics and all sorts of other things.
Let's go back a little further in history to World War II. Was mica a strategic commodity in World War II?
Most definitely. Use the right term, strategic mineral investigations. There's a lot of documents under that title. Mica was, you couldn't have a battleship, a submarine, an aircraft carrier, any of that could not exist without mica. I mean, it's just everywhere. It's heat resistant, it's oil resistant, it's water resistant. Its properties are just very universal, and one of the biggest uses is they would punch washers out of it, and it's used in heating systems. All of the propulsion systems within an aircraft carrier are using mica in the gaskets. It's just amazing. And then also, when you had a very thin, very, very thin piece, the earliest handsets, mica was what translated the vibration of your voice into the electronic signal. So communication's key.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did it have any characteristics beneficial to lubrication?
Oh yes, yeah. When it's finely ground, so large crystals like this would be sold. You would get the most money for them because it could be sold. But the scraps would then go to a plant typically that I know of that was in Medford, Mass, and it was a mica grinding plant, and they grind it up into a fine lubricant, and it was added to oils. It would extend the life of a motor oil in especially defense electronics. Tanks, American tanks could go 3 times the distance than the German tanks because they were adding mica. That was a top secret ingredient to the motor oil. And all sorts of other uses like that, yes.
Okay. What else can you tell us about other types of materials that were mined from here?
It's a very interesting fact, Bill, is that in 1915 there was a government publication that said that there was no feldspar of commercial quantity in the state of New Hampshire. 1915. That document came out. Then another book or study was done in 1918 by Starrett, and he went to a lot of the different mines and was cataloging what minerals were there. Feldspar is a key mineral. It's used in glass, porcelain, ceramics. It's again heat resistant. It's a very abundant material in the earth, but pure feldspar crystals, the size of which came out of these New Hampshire pegmatites was rare, and it ended up by 1942 we had the most profitable and productive feldspar mines in the world right here within 5 miles of where we stand.
Wow. Well, within the pegmatite
Yeah,
region.
right within Alstead, yep,
Yeah,
in the heart of the
Alstead.
Keene District.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. What else can you tell us about this area?
Well, we're standing at the site of what would be the country's 5th generation feldspar mill. We called it the crushing plant as locals because they crushed rocks, but the official term was a feldspar mill. The design was designed by the U.S. Bureau of Mines. The very first feldspar mill in the whole country was in Glastonbury, Connecticut, and a lot of the material at that point that got ground up as feldspar got shipped to England to be made into glass to be bought by Americans. But anyway, so 5 generations later.
So that's an interesting point. You said that the specification for the mine was dictated by the government?
No, yeah, all right. There is an interesting fact that I didn't think that this was true either, but the Department of the Interior set up the U.S. Bureau of Mines, and the whole U.S. Geological Survey and the Bureau of Mines is all set up to help businesses take advantage of natural resources that are in their backyard. So the Geological Survey crews will come out and determine what minerals are there. The U.S. Bureau of Mines will help determine that they can be extracted commercially for profit to make a company be profitable. So they're actually there to help American businesses grow.
I see. I see. Now, we're on the site of a former mine.
Or mill. This was the mill site. Yeah, the mines were all around us,
Okay.
and the felds. This was a feldspar mill, but rocks from all of the mines were brought to this site to be crushed and made into a powder. Can I show you what a feldspar crystal is?
Absolutely.
Got a nice big one for the camera. But anyway, it's a fairly white. Sometimes it's not exactly pure white, but again, abundant mineral, and this one is pretty pure in that there's no mica in it, there's no quartz in it. So this is a rock that they would love to have ground up here on site. So at the bottom of this feldspar, the feldspar mill was built into the side of a hill, and it was 10 levels of roof levels of different processing that took place. And at the very bottom, a pure white powder, looks like talcum powder or baby powder, would come out, as well as pure silica, which is basically like beach sand, but when you feel it, it has, you know, it's manufactured sand because it has edges. Beach sand is all rounded. So this feels quite different, but these were kept in silos at the bottom of the hill. There were 4 silos, and the plant at sometimes ran 3 shifts a day, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, processing feldspar. And the company that ran it was called the Golding-Keene Company, and they sold that feldspar to 16 states in America to make glass.
Wow.
The silica, the feldspar is very powdery, almost like graphite-like, but it was the sole ingredient in Bon Ami, which was a scouring powder, and they had a chick on the front that said the powder that wouldn't scratch. You could clean your metal of your stove, you could clean the sink or anything else in your kitchen with just this pure powder, and it wouldn't scratch the materials.
And so that would mean that that's lower on the Mohs scale.
Yes,
Than what it was cleaning.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and the pure silica is basically quartz, and that's higher than feldspar. Yeah.
Okay.
Let me show you one other thing that I
Okay.
did bring along.
Please.
In the processing of the feldspar that came, mica would often come out of the, or the rock that came here would have mica when it was crushed up. This plant would, excuse me, constantly expel mica, and in all different sizes. So these are pure little mica flakes that came from the site, and these are larger flakes. And there's little chunks of rock in there too.
Now, when the feldspar was being mined, was mica no longer a significant material that was being mined?
It went in and out of time. Mica was the oldest mined material and the most continually mined. The need for it went in and out. World War I, we were doing feldspar mining right after that 1915 period, and then it went back to mica mining, then it went back to feldspar between the wars, and then it went back to mica in World War II. So it did, and many of the mines here did actually go in and out of operation. Excuse me.
Yeah. What other types of minerals would be found in a pegmatite in this particular area that would have commercial value?
Tourmaline, which is in New Hampshire, tourmaline is black. It's a very high iron content. They use this to extract the element boron, and boron is used in so many chemical processes. So this was sought after at this particular plant. This was like death to the feldspar mill, because a small piece of pure black like this would get in and just ruin the white of the ceramic powder. So they wanted to keep this particular mineral out of this feldspar plant. That's just a piece that I brought as an example of pure tourmaline. It's also has some other wonderful properties. The other minerals, so we mentioned quartz, feldspar, mica, tourmaline. In the center of pegmatites, you'd find beryl, which is a beautiful collector's piece. It's always 6-sided. In this area, it's a milky green color, but if beryl is totally beautiful green, it's emerald.
Yeah. It comprised of the element beryllium.
Beryllium, yes.
Okay. And that had some significant attributes used in World War II, in particular the Manhattan Project.
In 1937, they developed the commercial extraction process, a company at that time called Brush Beryllium, and they learned how to grind it up and extract the element beryllium, and that was just prior to World War II, and as it turned out, that beryllium was used as a neutron reflector and multiplier, which in essence is the trigger for the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And so Beryl Mountain, I know hopefully we'll do a show on that particular mountain sometime in the future. 25 tons of beryl were picked off the piles just before World War II, and that was the first significant reserve of beryl used in the Manhattan Project.
So that had to, needless to say, really had a strategic value to this country.
Yes,
and
for
really
years.
contributed to our war effort.
And it's a miracle metal, beryllium by itself. I mean, it's terrible to talk about its use in the atomic bomb, but that's what kept it secret. That's why we didn't know about that happening. And it certainly obscured the production records here in New Hampshire. But New Hampshire, these southwestern mines had the highest concentration of beryl in the world.
Wow. Wow. What else do you have
I
here?
brought a couple of rocks here that are imported. These are not natural, but you do find them at the base of the Feldspar Mill. And these are actually a flint. It's very beautiful on the inside. But they were imported from the English Channel, and they're harder than the feldspar, and they were used in the final process in a giant drum. They would go around with the small feldspar pebbles and crush it into the powder. So these are called English Bluestone, or they come from the White Cliffs of Dover, and they were used as ballast in the ships when they came over from England, so they would use it for extra weight because the ships would be laden here. There's two places you find this, Boston Harbor and here in Alstead.
Yeah, interesting. I recall being at the White Cliffs of Dover with my videographer, and we observed as you get closer to the White Cliffs, you see inclusions of black. And this
that would be it.
This material.
A lot of times it was in clumps. The ones that were imported for this feldspar mill, I did confirm today with some of the gentlemen that worked here, were probably taken from the bottom or the shores of the English Channel because they came here already rounded. Yeah. So they had to have some workings by the ocean to round them off. These are the discarded ones. They came the size of grapefruit to baseballs in a bag, a burlap bag, no bigger than this, was 100 pounds, and they added one bag a day. And then they would take out the smaller ones and discard them. So amazing history to this feldspar mill because it worked for many, many years.
So these were actually harder than the feldspar and,
yes.
and worked?
Yeah, it's quartz. Basically a flint is a quartzite. Yep. But I didn't realize how pretty they were. We just liked them because there were no native round rocks here. Yeah. We used to collect them as kids, so I brought a couple of those along. I did bring one other interesting piece.
Sure.
This has nothing to do with rocks, but it does have to do with metals, and this is just a bolt. Excuse me, a nut, not a bolt. It's a nut from the facility. But what I found fascinating is that as it rusted, it included the mica and the quartz and the feldspar and the tourmaline. All of the minerals we were talking about have now been included into this rusty old piece of metal. So I found it particularly pretty and interesting as trying to preserve some of the history of this former mill.
Well, the bolt is really Fe, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So it just happens to be shaped.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of heavy metal, and the facility here was built out of tons of concrete, and
that's one thing I've noticed as we've walked through this area, that the parts of the mine, the workings of it, which are in disrepair now, they're huge.
Yeah.
You know, they're big pieces of metal, and you know, they had a tough job to break up material.
To make it the way it is now, yes. You know, the whole site is being reworked. We're actually standing on the former trucking lane that would have been where the trucks came up, and right behind us they would offload the rock that they brought from the mine. So we're at the top of the mill, and as I said, it was 10 levels. You can count 10 roof levels down. Yeah. Halfway down was a storage facility, and then the final processing for the feldspar.
So the operation here, where we're at the high point of the operation, this was a gravity-driven operation.
Correct.
That you started up here. Here come the trucks up here from the mines with the large feldspar boulders, and they take them out, put them in the crusher, and then the crushers would work
at reducing the size.
Sort of in a cascade.
Yep. The larger size boulders that I've heard about that could come here on site and be crushed, probably the torso size, and the very first crusher was only had one side that moved, but very thick steel. Yeah. And I think we interviewed one of the gentlemen, Jim, that ran that crusher, and so that would chunk it down into something maybe the size of a small or large softball, and then it would go into different type crushers, conical crushers that would crush it smaller, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And Jim described off camera, and I'm going to see if I can record this because it was very interesting, that the crusher was started, it was a 50 horsepower electric motor, and it had a flywheel on it. He described that was
6 feet in diameter.
yeah, huge flywheel and several feet thick.
Did he talk about it coming off?
Yeah.
That would have been a day.
Yeah, that he described that as a day.
Yeah.
But just huge pieces of equipment were used in this operation. And again, we can look here, and we have pictures of this, but it's hard not to. I know we have to stay on the camera, but it's hard not to turn. But we can see that it really goes down quite sharply.
Quite a grade.
There's quite a grade.
So the Golding-Keene Company, which is the one that built this mill, they had 2 former mills. The first one used to be in downtown Keene. It's noisy, it was messy. People didn't want it in their backyard, so they moved it off-site. We had one over on the Connecticut River border in the town of Walpole. There was a small crushing facility. And then, as I said, Golding-Keene came to develop this one. So they wanted to be right in the heart of the mining area so that feldspar could come from anywhere locally. And I also learned today that it came from quite a distance. I could tell you about that in a minute. But so this was the chance to build the Cadillac of feldspar mills, and that's why the U.S. Bureau of Mines were involved. And it was a flotation mill, and which means that at some point they would use water to float the mica off, and then the rocks would stay below. So that's how they could separate the mica into those huge mica piles. And then they used electricity to separate things like the tourmaline or any other iron that could be magnetized. They actually had giant magnetic screens that could pick out those minerals, and just an amazing process.
Yeah, and I think we got some shots before of the remnants of some of those magnetic screens. And even though the process here was very, very, what am I trying to say? It was very tough, and individuals. There was a lot of science behind the processes that were used to separate the materials.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'd love to add something that I am very proud to have put together some of the mica remnants that I have to a patent. And the patent was applied for and received in 1922. This mill wasn't built until 1946. So some of the technology behind separating the mica from the rock goes back 2 decades before this mill was even built. So yes, there are patents behind some of the processing equipment, or many patents, I'm sure. This is just one that I looked into, and it's fascinating how they learned all this.
Yeah. So, Jim, how many mines are within this greater pegmatite area?
May I get my map again?
Sure.
So we'll get a close-up of this, but on the back side here I have, I mentioned Keene, New Hampshire, then it comes to Gilsum, Alstead, Ackworth. That's the 3 towns that are on this particular map, and it's a topo map, but when we get a close-up, every one of these words is a mine.
Okay.
Just within Lake Warren is pretty much the center and epicenter. Lake Warren in East Alstead, New Hampshire. Within a 10-mile radius, there were over 100 mines.
Over 100 mines. Yeah. And were they all being worked at the same time?
Great question. No. They all came in and out of operation at different times. There were times when, once again, the pay for mica, it was easier to buy it, cheaper to buy it pre-World War II from India or Brazil. But when national security came about and the U-boats, the German U-boats, were sinking ships, supply ships that had mica, the government said, hey, we want to get it from our own shores. And they put out subsidies to the miners, and we actually were paying 4 times the price versus having it shipped in from overseas, but we were in control of it, and it was, again, a strategic mineral. So a lot of these mines go in and out of operation. As I said, the largest of the mines across the street goes back to 1810. Beryl Mountain in Ackworth is also one of the oldest and longest continually operating mines in the area. Yeah.
Okay. Who who's making the money
Hey, great question.
off of pegmatites and barrels and
Well, let's
micas
stick
and
with the
feldspar?
feldspar, just
Okay,
just to use the
feldspar?
modern example, because we probably have different examples with mica or
Sure.
beryl, but just use the feldspar because we're here at the feldspar mill. There's a person that owned the land, and often they're not the miners, so they would lease out the mineral rights. So this particular area in the Keene County Registry of Deeds, there are separate deeds for the minerals versus the land. So somebody owned the land, and then they leased their mineral rights out to somebody, so they got a little chunk for doing that.
Okay.
Now that person had to contact a mining company. That could have just been an entrepreneur. So then he had to have a mining company and a mining crew to do the work and put the investment into materials and compressors and dynamite and all that sort of thing. So there was the whole mining operations. Then when that product feldspar came out of the ground, at that point there was a whole nother trucking company that took it from the mine to this mill, and that was a whole nother entity that got a piece of the puzzle, and we're only halfway there. Then the mill processed the feldspar from rock to powder. They got paid. The powder then got trucked again to a railroad. They got paid, the same trucking company. Then the railroad got paid to bring it to Corning Glass Works in upstate New York, and Corning Glass finally did something with it. So I think there's about 7 or 8 layers of money that is being doled off of a very natural resource.
Now, not to mention the money that would be paid to the state and local governments for transporting that material over roads, over rail. There's taxes.
It must be, yes, yeah. I
taxes
never
and-
even looked into that, so there's a whole other, there's got to be a whole
taxes
other
involved
level.
in that.
Although they might have written off, there might have been a tax break for such a facility as this, because it was a showpiece. And now, so again, let's come back. The years of operation here. 1946 approximately is when this plant was built. It ran until not quite 66, but so if we take that 20-year period, there were times of operation where it ran in a slower pace, and there were times, as I said, it ran 3 shifts a day, 24 hours a day, right through the winter, and so on and so forth. So these mines were in operation often year-round. The mica mining was not typically done very much in the winter. So if we went back in time, way before before World War II, back in the late 1800s, we have diaries of a miner, Leon Osborne, and he kept a record every day of how many hundreds of pounds he bagged up in the bottom of the mine and carried out. He would carry out 2 to 3 to 4 to 600 pounds a day. He got paid $4 per ton, and he would make about $16 a week.
Yeah, amazing. There's so many different threads of history that can be told in an operation like this. I mean, it goes far beyond just mining.
Right, yeah. And part of what we'd like to do is trying to preserve this history here for Alstead, because a lot of the people, many residents don't realize how extensive the mining industry was. We all, those of us that were here in the 1960s when the mines came to cease, and then we all got out and started exploring them. There's value to mineral clubs for other minerals that we haven't quite talked about, but beyond beryl and tourmaline and spodumene, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
So the mineral clubs still come to this area to this day, collecting here. So that's another little aspect of being able to take advantage of this history. But we're just trying to interview some of these people that worked in the mines, because the foremans are all dead, the mine owners are all dead, the companies are all defunct, so there's nobody to turn to but these last few surviving members that were in their teens when they were working here, and we're very, very privileged to be able to interview them.
Yeah. Well, Jim, I want to thank you very much for introducing us to this area. We have some other guests that are going to follow us, perhaps in another show, that have actually worked in these mines and bring with them just a wealth of history. So, Jim, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
And I hope you all enjoyed this show, and we'll see you next time on Littleton Rocks.